Imagine a global project so huge it ropes in over 150 different countries. A project that promised to build the future. Sparkling new ports, super fast highways, massive airports. That was the dream of China's Belt and Road Initiative. But a decade later, that dream, for many, has turned into a nightmare of broken promises, crippling debt, and just unfinished ruins. Okay, let's dive into this incredible cautionary tale.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with its grand unveiling as the project of the century, then dig into the harsh reality of the debt trap. After that, we'll look at some specific, pretty shocking tales of broken promises, the global backlash that followed, and finally, what the road ahead might look like for this whole thing.
All right, so when President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI for short, back in 2013, the world really took notice. It was pitched as the project of the century, a plan that was going to completely reshape global trade.
But wow, fast forward just a decade, and the whole conversation has completely flipped. What was once celebrated is now being called a geopolitical disaster. And the heaviest price? It's being paid by the very developing nations it was supposed to help.
So what was this grand vision anyway? What was the big promise that was so powerful that over 150 countries jumped on board ready to go?
Well, the idea was huge, but the pitch was simple. Think of it as a modern-day Silk Road. It was supposed to connect the world, spur global development, and, not so quietly, position China as a new kind of world leader.
And China put its money where its mouth was, with a staggering $1.2 trillion in loans. And get this, they were specifically offering these loans to countries that Western banks thought were way too risky to invest in. For China, this was a huge opening.
But as the money started flowing and the construction crews got to work, let's say a much darker picture of the BRI began to emerge. That dream of development started to look a whole lot more like a trap.
And this brings us right to the heart of the main accusation against the BRI, debt trap diplomacy. The basic idea is that these weren't just generous loans, they were predatory, designed from the very beginning to take advantage of these vulnerable nations.
So critics lay out this pretty clear three-step playbook. Step 1, offer enormous loans for these giant projects that, let's be honest, the country can't really afford. Step 2, make it a rule that only Chinese companies can get the construction contracts. And then, Step 3, when the country can't pay back the loan, which was kind of the plan all along, you seize the very asset you just helped them build.
This really pulls back the curtain on what might have been China's real goals. This was probably less about global charity and more about a calculated strategy, a way to get rid of its own excess industrial stuff, lock down access to raw materials, and, of course, expand its power around the world.
Okay, so theory is one thing. Let's look at how this all played out on the ground, because the real story of the BRI is told through the actual projects, many of which have basically become monuments to failure.
First up, Sri Lanka. The leaders there were sold this amazing dream of a brand new deep-water port that would turn their nation into the next Dubai, a major hub for global trade.
But the port was a total bust. It just wasn't generating any money. So, unable to pay back the loans, Sri Lanka was forced to hand over control of its own port to a Chinese company on a 99-year lease. Think about that. A 99-year lease. It was a stunning loss of their own sovereignty.
And it gets even more absurd. Right next to that empty port, China financed a $200 million airport. Today, its nickname is the world's emptiest airport. It literally sees almost no flights.
Now let's look at neighboring Pakistan. The deal for their Gwadar port shows a just shockingly one-sided revenue split. China gets 91% of the income. Pakistan, the country where the port actually is, gets just 9%. The math just doesn't seem to add up there.
And this wasn't just happening in Asia. Let's jump over to Europe, to the small country of Montenegro. They took out a $1 billion loan from China to build a highway. So what did $1 billion get them? 41 kilometers of road. That's it. It's literally a highway to nowhere. And all Montenegro was left with was a tiny, useless piece of road and a national debt that shot up to over 80% of its GDP.
And in Ecuador, things got downright scary. It wasn't just a financial disaster, but a structural one. More than 17,000 cracks have shown up in the walls of a major dam that Chinese firms built. The whole thing is now at risk of collapsing, which could lead to a massive human and environmental catastrophe.
So, as you can probably guess, as all these stories of debt and disasters started piling up,
That initial excitement around the world for the BRI soured. It turned into skepticism, and then into a real organized backlash.
Maybe the biggest symbolic moment was when Italy, the only major Western economy that had signed on, pulled out in 2023. Their government basically said the promised benefits never came and that joining in the first place had been a big mistake.
And seeing this happen, the US and Europe launched their own competing plans, and they are very openly designed to be the anti-BRI. Where China's deals were secretive, they promised transparency. Instead of high interest rates, they pledged sustainable financing. It really signals a new kind of competition for global influence.
So, after a decade of chaos and trillions of dollars spent, what's the final verdict? And where does the Belt and Road Initiative possibly go from here?
While it's easy to call the BRI a total foreign policy failure for China, it's not quite that simple. Yeah, their global reputation took a massive hit, but at the same time, they successfully got stakes in over 100 ports around the world and locked down key trade routes. So, for them, it's a mixed bag, but one with some pretty big strategic wins.
Now China is trying to rebrand. They're talking about a BRI 2.0, focusing on smaller and greener projects. But the world is watching, and it's pretty skeptical. So the real question is this a genuine change of heart, or is it just a new sales pitch for the same old trap? And maybe more importantly, what does this whole